Hello, welcome. I'm Patrick Cunningham, and along with Jamie Carter, we will be your moderators today for the second virtual MEGUG Brown Bag Luncheon. We're very excited to be here today, and we're excited to have you along with us. All attendees are in listen-only mode right now, but if you have any questions for Claire or Tora or any of us, please just use the questions panel on the side, and we will do our best to answer them. It is a brown bag luncheon series. It's meant to be something casual, so we invite you to have questions, and we want to have a lively discussion if we can. So we're open to stopping and answering questions as we go along. That will be our plan. Let's get started. Just a second here. I just wanted to say a brief word about our speakers today. Our main speaker is Claire Enterline, and Tora Johnson will be presenting along with her as well, both on behalf of the Maine Climate Council. I'll be the moderator, and Jamie Carter will be assisting me as well. As you know, this is a Maine GIS Users Group Brown Bag Luncheon, and the Maine GIS Users Group is a nonprofit organization that promotes awareness of and encourages the coordinated development and effective use of geographic information and related technologies in Maine. MEGUG focuses its efforts in areas of policy liaisons, networking, research, education, and public relations. The group facilitates discussions and exchange of information and ideas in these areas by hosting regular meetings, workshops, and roundtables open both to members and non-members. And as you know, most years those are face-to-face meetings, and they're a lot of fun, and they're spread throughout the great state of Maine. This year, unfortunately, we've had to go virtual like many others, and we're very excited that we've come up with this virtual Brown Bag Lunch and Learn series. As you can see, we have our gold sponsors listed: Quantum, Blue Marble, and Esri. We do have a number of different levels of corporate sponsorship available. So you can visit our website, megug.org, to learn more about that. And also, I would love to take a moment just to remind you that you should have received your membership renewal just maybe yesterday. Please do renew your membership. If you didn't receive it, please log on to megug.org and check your membership status. We can only do this work through the support of our members. The Maine GIS Users Group board today is made up of these folks right here. I'm the chair. Our vice chair is Judy Colby-George, and our treasurer is Jeff Normandin. Education coordinator is Tora Johnson, who will be speaking today. The secretary is Andy Smith-Peterson, and we have 4 at-large members: Becky Schaffner, Jamie Carter, Taya Youngs, and Don Katnick. But you don't have to be on the board to participate. You can join up on our committees. Just send us an email saying be interested in helping out. We have committees for membership, for programs like these, for all kinds of different efforts that we're doing to promote GIS in Maine. And another way you can help is participate in our virtual brown bag luncheons. We have a number already scheduled for the rest of the summer, but we're looking for more ideas for the end of the year, as we don't think we'll be going anywhere anytime soon. So our next upcoming brown bag luncheon is July 30th, and we're going to do a review of the updates to the Maine GeoLibrary data portal interface. I know the GeoLibrary board has been working hard on updating the interface through a beta period, and we're excited to share the new interfaces and educate folks on what's available with the GeoLibrary data portal. And then we're going to take a break in August. In September, we have a review of the new 2022 datum coming with Dan Martin from NOAA, and he's going to speak on the changes to that datum and related issues with coordinate systems. October right now, we have scheduled a discussion on issues with mapping and tracking COVID-19 data. And as I said, we're looking for other ideas and other guest speakers. So if you're interested or you know of someone that would be good, please let us know. So before I hand things over to Jamie to introduce our speakers, I wanted to try asking a poll question of you all. I'm going to throw this into the polls interface. The question is, before this webinar was announced, how familiar were you with the Maine Climate Council? So you have an option there, you should see, where you can respond. And I see people are starting to respond, so that's great. I'll just leave this up for another few more seconds here. Okay. So I haven't done polls before on GoToWebinar, so I'm not exactly sure how I stop it or what will happen when I hit stop. So I'm going to read you the results right now in case they don't appear. But it looks like we've got about 20% are extremely familiar, another 20% moderately familiar, 40% find themselves just a little bit of knowledge, 20% not at all. So that's pretty cool. And I don't know, is that that's showing on my screen there? Yep. Let's flip back to the PowerPoint. Okay, cool. So, all right. Oh, I can share the results. Okay, let's try that. There you go. Now you can all see what I just read. Hopefully it didn't change too much. Okay, great. Now let's see if I can get it back to my slide deck. And while I do that, I will ask Jamie if you would like to introduce our speakers today.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everybody. Happy to see, or remotely, I suppose, see everybody here. So I'm Jamie Carter. I work for NOAA, and I'm a very willing board member for MEGUG here, and I'm very happy to introduce our speakers today. For those of you who aren't as familiar with the Maine Climate Council, we're going to hear specifically about some of the coastal and marine activities and then the community resilience activities through the work groups that were designed to support the Maine Climate Council at large. Our first speaker, Claire, will really dive into the details with that. And Claire is the research coordinator at the Maine Coastal Program in the Department of Marine Resources. She provides technical leadership regarding sampling methodology, data analysis, and reporting. She works with coastal managers at state, local, regional, and federal levels to translate scientific analysis into best management practices and management plans. She is an active member and a past chair of the Northeast Regional Ocean Council's Habitat Classification and Ocean Mapping Subcommittee. She has current projects that include the Maine Coastal Mapping Initiative, a project to map and describe marine benthic habitat, a salt marsh system-wide monitoring program, and the development of Coastwise, which is an approach to restore tidal flow at restrictions using voluntary and standardized and climate resilient best practices. She is serving on the Climate Council's Coastal and Marine Working Group. So we'll hear from Claire first. Our second speaker is Tora Johnson, who many of you are familiar with, again, as a board member here for MEGUG. Dr. Tora Johnson is the director of the Geographic Information Systems Laboratory at UMaine at Machias, where she also serves as the chair of the Division of Environmental and Biological Sciences. Also a writer, Tora's award-winning book, Entanglements, The Intertwined Fates of Whales and Fishermen, was released in 2005. Her research focuses on supporting sustainable and prosperous rural communities and inspiring college aspirations among rural youth. She serves on the Community Resilience, Public Health, and Emergency Management Working Group of the Maine Climate Council. So we'll go to Tora after we hear from Claire, and I'd like to now turn it over to Claire.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Jamie. Claire, I'm going to make you the presenter now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, let's get this up. And is that visible now? Yep, okay. Yeah. So thanks, Patrick. Hi, folks, and thanks for your time today. In this presentation, I'll give you a short overview of the Maine Climate Council in general, and the work we've been developing, mitigation and adaptation strategies, and highlight some of the strategies coming out of my working group that have specific overlaps with the spatial data collection tools and use. So the Maine Climate Council is charged with developing a plan to meet state greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets that are now in law, including a 45% greenhouse gas emissions reduction below 1990 levels by 2030, and at least 80% by 2050. As one part of the work to reach this goal, the Climate Council is charged with developing mitigation strategies to meet these reduction requirements in all sectors of the economy, with a focus on transportation, electricity, and building sectors. So here we can see that the trend of Maine's greenhouse gas emissions has been following a decreasing trend since 2004. And if we continue this trend, we're on target to reach the 2020 goal of reducing emissions to 10% below 1990 levels and the 2030 goal. However, to reach the 2050 goal, we must not only continue this trend, but enhance efforts to reduce emissions. And this is where the mitigation strategies that will be put forward by the Climate Council will be focused. The Climate Council is also charged with developing strategies that enable Maine, our economy, and our communities to adapt to the changes that will occur due to increased storm intensity, flooding, sea level rise, heat waves, changes in fisheries, and other things that we're going to see with climate change. All strategies, including the mitigation strategies coming out of the Climate Council, must do a few things. They must improve the resilience of our communities, people, and industries. They must prioritize the welfare of people and communities, foster and protect our natural resources, habitats, and resource industries, and encourage equity among all people. Finally, all the strategies of the Council utilize the most scientific and technical information. And as part of the work of the Council, experts from around the state and region developed a report, the Scientific Assessment of Climate Change and its Effects in Maine. And that informed the strategies that I'll present, and that report will be updated regularly. And you can get that on the Maine Climate Council website. So the Council is supported by multiple working groups that are charged with developing and recommending these mitigation and adaptation strategies. The working group members include legislators, scientific and academic experts, state and local government representatives, NGOs, and representatives from businesses and other stakeholders. Within each strategy, we provided information about the impact that the strategy would have on sectors of the economy, communities, natural resources, and also what it would look like if we did nothing. So the strategies that were presented to the Climate Council last week by the working groups were also accompanied by an external cost-benefit analysis. I'm not going to go very much into that cost-benefit analysis. It's still in draft form, but if you wanted more information, I could point you to who you could ask. So the different working group members, we have a lot of interplay with the Science and Technical Subcommittee, which provides the latest information on direct and indirect effects of climate change. And then there's also the working groups. So there's multiples, the buildings, infrastructure, and housing, the coastal and marine, of which I'm a member, the community resilience planning, public health and emergency management, of which Tora is a member, transportation, and the natural and working lands group. I'll be presenting the strategies that we forwarded to the Climate Council from the Coastal and Marine Working Group, specifically highlighting those that have a spatial mapping component. And Tora will present the community resilience strategies. We won't be covering the numerous strategies that were developed by the other working groups. These strategies will be formally presented during a 2-day virtual conference next Wednesday and Thursday, June 17th and 18th, each day from 9 to 12:30. And I certainly encourage you all to participate. You do need to register in advance to participate, and you'll get a personalized Zoom link. So please go to the Climate Council webpage if you'd like to register. So digging into the coastal and marine working group strategies, I'll outline some of the strategies coming out of our group. There are multiple strategies that have a nexus with the collection, analysis, use, and public consumption of spatial data in Maine. And these include mapping of coastal and marine areas to determine baseline conditions for the identification of restoration and conservation opportunities, and climate habitat forecasting. And of the habitats, we specifically highlighted salt marsh, eelgrass, and seaweed, subtidal characterization, beaches, dunes, and mudflats, and vulnerable infrastructures, including working waterfronts and communities. We also included in multiple strategies the need for decision support tools for managers, scientists, and communities, as well as policymakers. So getting into what our strategies are, I am going to list all of the strategies coming out of our working group and then highlight the ones that I'll be talking about here that have overlap. So these are to track and coastal and ocean climate impacts to support adaptive decision making, to provide technical assistance on and outreach networks for climate adaptation and mitigation to coastal and marine stakeholders. And this includes two components: the creation of the Coastal and Marine Information Exchange and the Maine Seafood Business Council. To promote climate adaptive ecosystem planning and management using nature-based solutions, to enhance mitigation by conserving and restoring coastal habitats that naturally store blue carbon, i.e. blue carbon optimization, to manage for resiliency of Maine's marine fisheries and aquaculture industries in the context of climate change adaptation, and to support climate-ready working waterfronts. To develop these strategies, our working group split into multiple subcommittees based on members' areas, area of work and expertise. These 6 strategies were distilled from and combined of over 20 climate-related coastal and marine mitigation opportunities and adaptation issues. So I'll focus on the ones that I've highlighted here, and I did want to pause for a moment after just kind of giving a lot of information about the Climate Council in general and all of the working group strategies that Coastal and Marine is putting forward, and knowing that I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ones that are highlighted, just wanted to pause to see if there was any questions about the Climate Council in general or the strategies that I will not be talking about.
So if you have any questions, you can put them right in the chat. We did have somebody asking about if the recording would be available afterwards, and it will. We have a YouTube channel now where we can post the recording. And I also put the link to the Maine Climate Council website in the chat so folks could register for that upcoming public meeting that you mentioned. Oh, we do have a question here. What's an example of a nature-based solution for a working waterfront?
So the nature-based solutions, that's a separate strategy from the working waterfronts. I'll go into a little bit more of what we were talking about for nature-based solutions. So actually, if we can pause on that question. The working waterfront strategy is more revolving around supporting working waterfronts to mitigate some of their emissions, to change over to renewable energy at their waterfronts, and to adapt to sea level rise, and also to start a working waterfront revolving loan fund to do that.
Okay, great. So that appears to be all the questions we have right now. If you want, you can feel free to continue.
Yep. And let's see. Somehow, there we go. Are you guys seeing my presentation still?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. So the first strategy that I want to go into a bit more is to improve the breadth, applicability, use, and sharing of monitoring data to track coastal and ocean climate impacts to support adaptive decision making. This strategy has multiple actions that include leveraging existing monitoring programs, expanding monitoring and data collection, specifically of water quality, nutrient loading, and ocean acidification, as well as invasive species and shifts in native species, and improving and tracking economic trends. Within the spatial realm, we pull out the need for characterizing, mapping, and tracking changes in marine and coastal habitats, and the need for better intertidal and subtidal mapping and habitat characterization. And these will both be needed both for improving the baseline information that we have, as well as for us to be able to forecast and track climate changes. Finally, this strategy identifies the need for coordinated funding to support an integrated monitoring system. Another strategy that I want to highlight is the recommendation to create a coastal and marine information exchange. This exchange would support and accelerate mitigation and adaptation actions through participation by coastal and marine stakeholders to improve the integration of environmental, economic, and social data to advance understanding the consequences of climate change. And this engagement strategy would bring together stakeholders to identify and address priority needs and coordinate research, develop decision support resources, maintain relevant and accurate climate information, and share feedback on resources via targeted audiences, like different marine coastal stakeholders and policy briefings. So this strategy builds upon the last strategy, where the exchange would identify the data needs, and the last strategy, the monitoring strategy, is really the on-the-ground data collection and coordination of that. And then this exchange then would then develop resources and tools and provide the information dissemination. Another strategy focuses on the potential of salt marshes, eelgrass, and seaweeds to sequester carbon, thereby reducing local greenhouse gases and ameliorating coastal ocean acidification. And to understand and track Maine's blue carbon potential, the strategy describes 4 main actions: creating a comprehensive coast-wide inventory of blue carbon resources, including the mapping of tidal marshes, seagrass, and seaweed beds, including species composition. And we stress the importance of regular mapping in this strategy as a need to assess change over time. These improved mapping data would then improve our ability to quantify both state greenhouse gas emissions and the mitigation potential of existing blue carbon resources and track how that changes. Determining the role that strategic management of seaweed aquaculture plays in long-term carbon burial and in locally reducing coastal acidification, and conserving and restoring salt marshes and eelgrass. As part of the strategy, we developed rough blue carbon estimates for Maine's current salt marsh, eelgrass, and kelp biomass, and projected the biomass of these habitats into future sea level rise conditions based on the sea level curves that were predicted as highest probability by the Science and Technical Committee. The economic analysis performed by ERG Consulting, who is contracted to the governor's office, did an economic analysis that then associated a cost to blue carbon and projected $500,000 to $2.5 million around that, and lost carbon sequestration value under no restoration or conservation scenarios. And there's a question earlier about nature-based, so I'm going to go into that more here. So this strategy is to promote climate adaptive ecosystem planning and management using nature-based solutions. And this ecosystem-based adaptation strategy identifies actions that leverage a range of tools, including regulatory, voluntary, incentive-based, and best management practices that promote coastal community and ecosystem resiliency through adapting to changing environmental conditions, harnessing our natural resources, and protecting jobs, infrastructure, and biodiversity. For this strategy, we rolled many coastal habitat strategies into this one overarching strategy as part of a subcommittee we had on coastal ecosystem resiliency. So I apologize if these headers seem overly vague. I do want to expand on a few of the actions that are bolded here that might be of interest to this forum. So number 3, conserve and restore ecosystems to foster resiliency. This action calls for protecting vulnerable ecosystems and restoring degraded habitats to benefit biodiversity and species most vulnerable to climate change. This would have to be achieved through improved coastal mapping, is something that we called out for this one. Restoring hydrological connectivity using climate adaptive upgrades to road crossing infrastructure to improve climate adaptation and to benefit communities, habitats, and fish. And a critical component of this action requires better knowledge of where tidal flooding, sea level rise, and freshwater flooding are likely to occur in order for us to improve infrastructure planning.
Claire, we do have a question actually.
Yeah.
How are you tying this into stormwater? If the questioner recalls that runoff is damaging to the eelgrass and other submerged aquatic vegetation?
Yeah, sure. So number 7, I wasn't going to go into that because it didn't really have a mapping component to it, but there's an entire component of this strategy that is put towards strengthening stormwater management and in an effort to reduce nutrient runoff for eelgrass. So I don't know if that answers it, but I would highly suggest that person go and they could read through the entire component of that strategy, because I didn't pull it out as one of the things that I was going to go into right now. I apologize for that. Okay. So getting back to the ones that really have a mapping tie. So number 5, protect and restore beaches and sand dunes in order to help coastal marshes, beaches and dunes migrate inland with sea level rise. This requires better mapping and modeling of nearshore transport and beach and dune movements over time. And then finally, characterizing and mapping marine and coastal habitats is something that we pulled out in multiple strategies that needs to be done for us to have planning and management that's effective. So as I mentioned before, I've only presented a really, really top thin layer and only of some of the actions and some of the strategies and the working group discussions that led to the development. If you want more information about past meetings, please go to the Maine.gov Climate Council website, and thanks Patrick for including that in the chat. And Patrick, I'm wondering if you can also put in the chat the link that I gave for accessing the working group strategies. Our group worked over Google Drive to share everything. And I'm going to attempt to show you guys what that looks like real quick. So if you were to click on the link for our Google Drive strategy, you would come into here and there would be a PDF, and this report then includes information about a summary of all the strategies, and then goes into all of the strategies in detail, each of which are 10 to 24 pages on their own. So, you know, for questions about that stormwater one and how that's tied into things in the working waterfront, all of that will be detailed in this report. So I'll go back up to the presentation so that you guys can write down those links, or Patrick, if you're able to share that link, that's great. And finally, the working group strategies have already been presented to the Climate Council last week. So working group members are not taking comments on them anymore, but the Climate Council certainly is. If you would like to make a comment, please go to the contact page on the Climate Council's website, and you can provide feedback there. There's also a list of all the Climate Council members and the working group members, and the working groups are not done. We will still be having a lot of feedback back and forth with the Climate Council. So even though we will not be formally changing strategies based on public comment through the working groups, we will still be an active part of any strategy revisions that need to happen before next December. And again, I would encourage people to attend the virtual meetings next Wednesday and Thursday and register in advance. So that's what I have.
Thanks, Claire. We did have one other question. Will the future map data be publicly available?
Yes. So as a state government employee, all of the data that we collect is always public, but anything that would be collected as part of the initiative and to support these strategies would be asked to be public. Certainly there are academic institutions in the state that are working on a lot of these issues too, and that's where the Marine Information Exchange comes in. Mm-hmm. Would be working with those folks and also private companies that generally don't make their data public, and making those public, if not raw data, in a way that can be available for public dissemination.
Great. And we had another question, let's see, do my best with this, regarding blue carbon and spatial mapping. How will marshland coastal squeeze be addressed as sea level rises?
Yeah, well, I would love to know how it'll be addressed. I could tell you how we suggested it should be addressed, and that was that marsh migration pathways need to be conserved and protected, if not by conservation when that's possible, at least by some kind of arm that protects marsh migration spaces. We also discussed at length the need to allow for tidal flow into marsh migration spaces, as well as currently tidal marshes that have a restricted tidal flow and a salinity below 18 parts per thousand are actually net greenhouse gas emitters, because they start emitting methane, which has an order of magnitude higher greenhouse gas effect. So we also talked about the need for improving the health of current marshes that are restricted.
Okay, excellent. So thank you so much, Claire. As I hand it over to Tora, I'm going to ask our second poll question. And the question is, does your work involve climate related GIS analysis? So I'm going to launch that poll for you all right there. And I'm going to do my best to multitask here and change our presenter over to Tora. Tora, you should now have control as I have to finish the question as people are hopefully responding. And I will close the poll. And I don't know if the results appeared or not, but I'm seeing that 52% of respondents said no. So it's about a 50-50 split as far as folks that are involved in climate work. So that's good. We have those in the know and those that are here to learn more. So let's see what folks are seeing here. Here's Tora's slides on my screen. I hope everybody's seeing that. And
great.
Okay, Tora.
Everybody, great. All right. So I'm a member of the Community Resilience Planning, Public Health and Emergency Management subgroup of the Maine Climate Council. And as you might imagine, that's a mouthful. And it is kind of a behemoth of a working group. I think it's the largest of the working groups. And we divided ourselves into three subgroups. The Community Resilience Planning, Emergency Management, and Public Health we're all sort of, we largely operated separately, and then we come together to do some reporting. And each of the subgroups created their own strategies to recommend to the Climate Council. So I'll go through all the strategies, and I'll again highlight the ones that are relevant to GIS users. And just to sort of preface the relevant information, there's a lot of places where GIS would intersect with these recommendations. So to highlight some of them, one is helping to move not only comprehensive planning support, but also all the support we do for land management functions at the municipal level, help to integrate climate-related data sets and products into that process. There's a whole bunch of places throughout these strategies where decision support tools will come into play, and I'll highlight those as we go where I think of them, and I'm sure you'll be able to think of others, and feel free to suggest them. There's also emergency response tools that can come into play and to help with with climate adaptation, and a whole bunch of vulnerability and scenario analysis that will help folks to make plans and understand where to invest and how to prioritize actions in adaptation and mitigation. And then especially in the public health realm, there's a push to increase monitoring systems. And obviously that has a spatial component, and that's really crucial. And throughout all of these strategies, there's an opportunity for using maps for public education, and the degree to which those engage and support public decision making is really important. So those are the sort of themes that we'll run through, and I will go over all of the strategies. I'll mention all the strategies. Some of them really aren't particularly relevant to geospatial technology, but we'll just mention that they exist. So first we'll talk about the community resilience subgroup. And the primary strategy is to look at all of Maine laws that may have relevance to community resilience, and look at how they might change, or how rulemaking and guidance on the state level might change in order to support community resilience and to incentivize community resilience. So things like the comprehensive planning statute, the shoreline zoning statute, and all of the taxation programs and incentivization programs that work with communities, especially with regard to environmental resources. How can they be updated? How can we incorporate regulatory review processes, technical assistance and training and certification, all of that that incorporates climate change as a consideration and helps to support community resilience. So obviously mapping is threaded throughout this, and there's lots of opportunities, and we know already that that geospatial technologists engage with all of those processes. They all involve mapping, and so we're going to need to adapt our approaches and data sets and the ways that we help communities meet these requirements from the state, and hopefully we can engage in the process of revisiting and reviewing all of the Maine laws, so that we can make sure that we can have a robust level of support from the geospatial community. Strategy 2 from the community resilience subgroup is to improve the delivery system of technical assistance on resilience to municipalities. I think it's obvious how geospatial technology would play a role here, because a lot of the technical work that has to happen with regard to resilience has a geospatial component. And so the geospatial community can really support this by participating and working up ways to offer technical assistance. I do know that the Maine Geospatial Institute through the University of Maine system is looking at how to engage with this process through workforce education, and we hope that the private sector will also come on board for this. And part of this also is providing a clearinghouse of data and decision support tools, most of which will have some kind of geospatial component to support all of the kinds of decision points that folks will be needing to make on the community level in order to build resilience. This strategy 3, isn't directly related to the geospatial community, although one would hope that funding mechanisms that would be put in place to help communities achieve resilience, and I'm not going to get into this just in the interest of time, but we would hope that funding mechanisms would include providing for geospatial technology support for communities. And then I felt like it was worth bringing up this, and I actually, I know this is included in the materials, but it's not officially a strategy. is the getting out of harm's way or managed retreat. But this was a thread of conversation throughout the discussions of this subgroup. It's a very controversial idea, the idea that you need to relocate people, businesses and homes, et cetera, to move out of harm's way where there's high vulnerability to climate change, such as through sea level rise and storm surge impacts and, river flooding and that sort of thing. And there's a whole bunch of spatially explicit concerns that arise out of this question. And so this is a question that a lot of communities will be grappling with when they begin to really think about their resilience, and a lot of scenario building and monitoring and economic analysis will be required for each community to answer this really, really difficult question of, do you pursue managed retreat, or do you fortify, for instance, your coastline and allow businesses and homes to remain what is currently in harm's way? And then on to the emergency management subgroup. And this subgroup developed just one strategy. And the reason for that is they recognize that Maine has a pretty robust emergency management system with a lot of support for communities and for counties that is in and of itself working well. But there's one really crucial missing piece, and that is infrastructure vulnerability. Both the emergency management, dealing with emergencies and planning for emergencies and preventing them is a huge area of vulnerability in terms of emergency management in the state. And so their one recommendation is to develop and implement a non-disaster related state infrastructure climate adaptation fund, meaning to allow communities to plan and implement before a disaster ever happens. So FEMA calls it the pre-disaster mitigation. Before a disaster ever happens, efforts to implement resilience in the state's infrastructure. And they note that, and this is really crucial, that there's a lot of cost share requirements for adaptation projects, and many projects can't meet them. And we have a huge backlog of mitigation projects worth $325 million. A bunch of county hazard mitigation plans are out of compliance with FEMA because of deferred projects. And this may not on the face of it seem to have a geospatial component, but it's a pretty important one. In fact, this subgroup did highlight a project that my university participated in Machias, looking at the highly vulnerable wastewater treatment plant in that community. So this is a group of just kind of the top most vulnerable, and this is millions and millions of dollars just in and of itself. And you can see that many of them are only a foot and a half above current highest astronomical tide levels. And so there's some urgency here for a lot of this infrastructure. This is what they regard as the top priorities, but there are literally hundreds across the state. And each one is going to require some, and very often, geospatial scenario building to understand what levels of vulnerability it has, what options there are for intervention and, modification or rebuilding or retreat or, whatever the options are. And that has been a really valuable part of the work that we've done in Machias to help them develop planning for resilience for their downtown and for protecting their wastewater treatment plant. And there's lots of other places in the state where folks are undertaking similar analyses, and others where they really need to.
Yes. We have a question about how important, and this maybe sound a little tangential, but I think it really resonates when you think about especially the down east areas, but how important statewide broadband will be for local officials to access the data and do the mapping for coastal resiliency. I don't know if there's another way to get funding related to that, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's certainly true, and this is somewhat of a side note, but one of the really crucial considerations that we had throughout our discussions in our working group, really throughout all 3 subgroups, was issues of equity, and that was one of them. So the access to broadband, and that also brings up capacity. So one of the things that broadband does for us is that it expands what we can consider capacity within a remote rural area, right? So we don't really regularly work, for instance, with communities in northern Washington County. They have really bad broadband there, broadband access, very few people have it. And so they're not really able to access some of the services that the UMaine at Machias laboratory provides, because they're not able to, use our web-based maps or attend trainings that we offer remotely. So, so that's a crucial piece, and it's a big state. We're really spread out. So that's certainly a really critical consideration among many other equity considerations that we brought up. And access to geospatial technology was one of those equity considerations, and broadband is inextricably linked, especially as we depend more on web-based tools for this. So yeah, that's a great point.
Well, and the work, this prior slide where you're showing the sea level rise data reminds me of the COAST tool that
Yes.
first developed out of University of Southern Maine, that was all 3D modeling of different scenarios of flooding to show local communities or stakeholders what could happen with just even a 10 or 20-year storm and a high tide to these assets, and obviously you have to have computer power to be able to display a 3D model that's running at a town meeting in the middle of nowhere or remotely to somebody today, right? So it is actually a really a true point of fact that we need to continue to work with this.
And that has been a huge part of how we've operated to support the rural communities that we work with in the Down East region and some in Aroostook County as well, and getting up into rural parts of Penobscot County, is by providing web-based maps that can that lower the bar, but there's a limit to how much of that we can do. So we will run the high tech analysis locally and create products that are accessible, but you need at least a DSL connection, and those are surprisingly still not as prevalent as you would hope in some parts of the state.
Related question to this point that we have, it actually comes from Jamie, but it's a good one. So how will the council ensure the technical assistance, financial assistance, and other resources that are distributed equitably, to distribute them equitably among these Maine communities?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that I think is a work in progress. I would like to know how the Climate Council will move forward on this. I will say that in discussions, not only with this working group, but in I think really all the working groups, questions of equity have come up repeatedly, and in some cases the working group got pushback on some of the strategies and some of the way the strategies were framed that seem to leave out equity considerations. But that's going to be really, really huge. Some of our most vulnerable communities are have the least capacity and the least fewest resources to address it. And so I would encourage you to get involved in and I will be pushing that equity question quite a lot, especially with the urban-rural and suburban-rural divide, as I've been doing throughout this process.
Okay, great.
So we've got one more subgroup to go through, and that's the public health subgroup. And they have 4 strategies. And the first strategy is to improve public behavior related to climate impacts, and specifically looking at monitoring and education. There's geospatial considerations in all of these. There's, for instance, been quite a lot of monitoring and mapping of harmful algal blooms in coastal waters, but we need to step up our efforts in lakes and public water supplies for harmful algal blooms. And we need to be not only monitoring that, but mapping them and making that information available to communities in ways that are actionable for planning. Also vector-borne diseases are another really crucial piece. And as these phenomena evolve, monitoring how they evolve and making sure that the public has access to understand their own risks and opportunities to change their behaviors. There's strategy 2, public education about climate change health effects. A similar, so again, maps that help the public to assess their own vulnerability and actions that they can take to reduce their vulnerability will be really crucial. This is a place where my laboratory and other folks across the state have worked a lot very closely with both local and regional planning around impacts from high intensity weather events. There's a huge amount of work to do still, although a lot of existing geospatial tools, so the COAST tool, the coastal resilience tool provided by the Nature Conservancy, some of the web-based mapping scenario tools that we've built through our lab for Down East region, allow communities to think through scenarios and provide decision support for them in choosing methods for improving their resilience to high intensity weather events. Some of the places where we're really short on this sort of thing, we still have more to do with coastal resilience, but riverside communities, communities settled around rivers, are places that have had minimal input on this strategy, and we really need to consider the impacts of high intensity weather events, especially on those riverside communities. A good case in point is the effect that Hurricane Irene had on Vermont, and there but for a few degrees in direction go we. We have a very, very large number of very vulnerable communities that could be devastated by impacts of an event similar to Hurricane Irene in 2011 had on Vermont. And so scenario building, floodplain mapping, and predictions, and also incorporating groundwater into those tools will help those riverside communities in decision support going forward. And then finally, their final strategy is improving healthcare systems' capacity to mitigate and adapt to climate change. I won't get into this much, but we have a very vulnerable healthcare sector in the state, and climate change will increase both demand on their services, and the facilities themselves have the opportunity to, or need to take the opportunity to build their resilience to effects of climate change, and also reduce their impact on the climate themselves. And so again, I just want to reiterate, encourage you to visit the Maine Climate Council website. You'll find the materials for all of the working groups, and each of the working groups has created their own strategies. The draft strategies are currently available, and soon the full strategies, all of the strategies recommended from all the working groups will be available on the website. I'm not sure when that will be, but I know they've been submitted, so it should be quite soon. And then again, next week, the 17th and 18th, I believe, is is the 2-day meeting, and the agenda should be posted on the Maine Climate Council website, and that way you can sort of pick and choose, if you want to know which working group, and choose the working groups that you observe their presentations. And that's an opportunity to, get back to some of these questions that we've been grappling with, and push the equity question, mention things that you feel are missing, etc. And that's what I have. Any questions for me?
Yeah, that's excellent, Tora. That was really good. I'm going to ask back all of our panelists, Claire and Jamie, if you're able to join us. I have a question while we're waiting for them to come back on. This could be for you or Jamie, or maybe Claire has some insight. How has sort of changing technology for GIS, like drone mapping and LiDAR, has it assisted in your analysis and ability to study climate change in the coastal areas?
Yeah, definitely, and I'm sure Claire has the same insights. LiDAR was a game changer for us, and it was a huge watershed, so to speak, and allowing us to help, especially small communities, do coastal resilience planning. So that was a big game changer. I will say there's a huge equity consideration in terms of data access. So we were super lucky to get coastal LiDAR early on in the LiDAR acquisition process. But where we're falling short is for the down east regions and some of the rural riverside regions, we still don't have access to some LiDAR in those areas, and land cover and high resolution aerial imagery really isn't available to the degree that it is in other parts of the state where they have the money to do the buy-ups with the state. So yeah, certain of these new technologies and new data sets have been really revolutionary to our ability to support communities in this kind of planning. But some of these rural communities, the rural regions of the state, are having trouble with acquiring it. Also, land cover data is kind of long in the tooth, and without good 4-band aerial imagery, we can't sort of create it ourselves, and so that's something Jamie and others and I have been working on, seeing if we can move towards some better land cover data.
Jamie, any thoughts on that land cover issue or drone mapping?
I mean, both are enablers of a lot of the decisions that we're trying to make right now. And I'm working on projects with Claire, for instance, and as Tora just mentioned, this statewide land cover, working with UMaine and the Geo Library to try to figure out strategies we can actually implement these mapping efforts at a statewide scale that are both economical and can be repeated every 5 years or so. So by engaging with you, our members, to understand what the appropriate repeat cycle would be, and then to actually build the capacity at the state level to fulfill those needs, is something I'm actively working on. So through a lot of smaller projects, I think we are testing out new types of technology like drone mapping to determine whether or not they add value and how they add value, and where we can incorporate those into these broader statewide efforts. So
well I know
to hear from
one of Claire's slides on the tidal areas reminded me of a presentation I saw on a local surveyor using drones to map some tidal areas in Scarborough, I think it was. Have you had any experience with that, Claire, or that kind of data?
Yeah, I use that data a lot for many of the projects that we work on, and our strategies did specifically call out the need for regular 5-year LiDAR mapping of the entire coast for some of those equity issues, and for our ability to do the actions that we said we wanted to do. We also called out the need for regular eelgrass mapping data and high resolution aerial images, not just for Casco Bay, but for the entire state on a 5-year basis. And we did cost estimates for drones in some of our strategies, because we've used those for many different things, but recently sand dune management and beach management. So those are specifically referred to in our strategies, as well as other types of mapping that we work on.
Yeah, I mean, change detection and change detection and all those kind of analyses that you can do must be very helpful. Tora, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I should mention also that we did use drone mapping in the work that I mentioned for assessing downtown Machias resilience and doing some modeling there. I've done some work with the Department of Marine Resources using drone mapping for mussel beds as well, and there's a lot of potential there. And eelgrass is another one that we've been looking at in Frenchman Bay. So there's a lot of potential there, a lot of work that we can do with drone mapping, but again, access issues. It's very, very costly.
So we have a question from one of our attendees. And this might be for Claire, what are the timing of these initiatives? Will these efforts be ongoing? And I can't quite see the rest of the question. I apologize. Go ahead.
I know Cassandra Rose was on. I don't know if she's able to talk or if it's just the panelists. I would love her to answer that question. Because as a working group member, I know that our schedule is basically that we are wrapping up our work for developing strategies, and that the chairs of all the working group members will now be in close coordination with the Climate Council, but that over the next 6 months, the Climate Council will be working through all of these strategies, finding synergies between the strategies, and deciding which strategies they would like to either combine or reword or move forward to the final climate action plan that will be forwarded to the legislature in December. Cassandra, I really hope I got that right. You can chat if
I can give her the mic, but she could certainly comment. She says it sounds perfect, so that's great.
Good.
So it has been an hour, so we'll just take a couple more questions, and I don't want to go too long. We do have one. Curious about collection methods for some of those data sets, eelgrass, marshland boundaries, et cetera. Is that part of land cover analysis, or are they also being manually surveyed?
It's a combination of all of them, and Jamie and I do a lot of this work together. We do a lot of manual on the ground surveys. I know Jamie's been working on using LiDAR and drones to also use verticosity and different signals for vegetation. For eelgrass, I led a project in 2018 that I promise I'm going to finish the report and publish it this summer. It'll happen. But we used drones and multi-beam, single beam side scan, aerial images, and feel like there was, did I mention drones? We used drones. But so comparing all those different things for eelgrass monitoring, and high resolution aerial image is still the most cost-effective way to go.
And does that move to the land cover? Or Jamie, do you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I was talking about different acquisition ways to get land cover. So we are using all of that in order to then make land cover models. I am not as involved with and Jamie could talk to this more, regional land cover models, but I tend to be, my work has been more site specific, but certainly the strategies coming out of the Climate Council would utilize both and talk about the need for long-term support of both, and for really moving the needle on getting the best information that we can in the most cost-effective way.
Okay. Jamie, any other thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I guess if we have a second, I can jump in on that, because the land cover data that we're developing these days is typically very high resolution, 1 meter or better. And it's an instance where, depending on what the state or the audience needs, we can generate it. So we have examples from New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, recent examples where we generated wall-to-wall land cover, but in certain instances, like in the state of Rhode Island and the state of New Hampshire, we actually mapped all of the coastal salt marshes as well, right down to the species level. And that data is being used for a variety of purposes, management planning and resilience planning. The state of Massachusetts is embarking on a greenhouse gas inventory using that data set. And so there are a lot of, I think, downstream applications of these core data sets that we can be considering. And so I'll be working with Claire and Tora and anybody else at the state who's interested in looking into ways to fund some of these statewide land cover and habitat data sets. Already there are areas or agencies like the Natural Areas Program and the Coastal Program, DMR, who are looking at these specific features and figuring out ways to do that, like Claire just mentioned. So I think we'll just build on their expertise and continue trying to advance this at a statewide scale.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think that's about all we have time for. I wanted to thank our speakers, Claire and Tora. I think that was a great conversation and very educational. Maybe we've got some other ideas that would be, fodder for future MEGUG lunch and learns, I think, from some of these questions, which were excellent. And I apologize, folks, if we didn't get to all the questions. I don't think we did. We will do our best to get answers out to those that posted in the chat that we didn't respond to. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Look for the presentation to be posted as a video through megug.org. And for further information, we'll also have links to how to get a hold of Claire or Tora for more information from them. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, Tora. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Jamie. Everybody
Thank you, Claire and Tora.
Have a great rest of the day.
Yep.
Bye-bye.